Hey there, fellow marketers. Welcome to the introduction of the Elements tab. Today we're going to have a look at what we can do with the Elements tab and why you would want to use it. Most people that are actually already using the DevTools use the Elements tab. And there's a very good reason for that, because it allows you to play with the websites that you're seeing in front of you, with the web page that you're seeing in front of you, to be more specific. And the things that you can do with it, for example, is to change things around, make certain elements bigger or smaller, change an H1 to an H2 just to see what it looks like, but also to literally change text. So a good use case for this tab is to quickly show somebody what you're trying to achieve with your idea and what it will look like according to your vision. It's handy if you know a little bit of HTML and CSS. It's not required for this tutorial. Maybe you'll pick up one or two things, but for sure you'll recognize some of the things that at least SEO people like myself talk a lot about. So without further ado, let's get into the computer and let me show you what I mean with all of this.
So when you open up a page in the inspector, like this, it actually opens up the Elements tab. And anytime I hover over anything, it's already highlighting which elements in the page I am hovering over. What I will do now is I will walk you through all of the components within the Elements tab that we see in front of us, and some of them that are hidden, what they all do, what they all mean, and how you can use them as a marketer. We will be making some changes to the page. I'll be teaching you how to make styling changes, text changes, and actually make some changes to the HTML. Make sure that you have seen the video around the difference between the page source and what we have here in the Elements tab within Chrome DevTools, as they can be quite different from each other. So without further ado, let's move into what we have here. So first of all, the most people in marketing already use this tab. And I guess this is also the one that I see most people using compared to some of the other ones that we have here. It speaks for itself that, for example, when we want to make a change and we want to change the typo that we have here, just for the sake of it, we can go in there, double click the text, and we actually get to go there with the arrow buttons and then on the keyboard, and then we make the change. You now actually see the change here on the page. And that's what we want, right? We want to make some changes to the page. It's very important to realize that when we do this, you're not changing anything on the server side or anything. It's just in front of you. Nobody else can see this change. As a matter of fact, let me refresh the page. Just press Ctrl R. When we do that, actually everything goes back to normal, and we can see that the typo is back. So this really is just to make some changes for yourself or with some conversations with your colleagues. Of course, we can do more. We can also drag and drop things around. Like, for example, I don't like anymore where this is located. I would prefer this to be horizontally over my photo as well. So I can take this H1 element and I can actually move this up a little bit, so that it goes outside of this div and it goes inside, but still stays within this div. And then immediately it gets the space that this div has created for itself. So it's now a lot wider. However, it doesn't still look amazing. And this is where the CSS comes in handy. So what we have here on the right, and it is possible if your screen is a bit smaller that it is on the bottom. So you can just change all this around. But now we can start making changes on the CSS. So first of all the CSS and all the styles that you see here is like literally all of it. So including the ones that are overwritten eventually. So you have to imagine this. You create CSS, and then sometimes you create another CSS element that overrides the previous element, the previously defined element. And that the reason behind that is pretty much the hierarchical nature of this HTML and how we can reference and the behavior of it from a CSS point of view. So from a let's say a design point of view. And you can recognize them by this. So it's this one is also not working. This one is not working. As a matter of fact, when you go to the computer tab, this is where you see all of the CSS that is actually in play right now. So display might have been overwritten a couple of times. Color might have been overwritten a couple of times. Here you see for this specific element that I have selected now, what the end result is that is being used to showcase this specific box, because we're actually referencing this box. If I just reference this, we can see here all of the used CSS. On top, we see more or less the block that it is being rendered in. So this is the actual block that is the text, but you have to imagine around a bit of a block of around a div, you have some inner padding, a border, and some outer margin that you can play with as a developer, as a front-end developer, and that allows you to make changes to where in space this block actually exists. You can show everything, all of the CSS that is applied, even all of the CSS that is automatically and automagically applied, but that usually doesn't make any sense. So most of the time you just want to use all of the CSS that either you're working with as a developer or that you literally just see on the page there. I like to group it because that makes it very easy to find things. It's still alphabetically ordered, but now within the group that it is in. So either a text or a layout grouping. There's more types of grouping whenever that's applicable. So let's make this one appear a little bit nicer on the page. So there's a couple of things that we can do to do that. We can either go in here and find, for example, the fact that there is a margin on the bottom, which is this orange element that we are now seeing highlighted, and we can turn that off. We don't want that. We can also simply go in here and delete this reference. Now it's also gone. You can press Ctrl Z and then it comes back. There is another way of turning it off, and that is here in the CLS, stands for class, that are selected specifically based on what you have here. So if I move up here where there's many, boom, you get to see that there's more. And then I can actually start turning things off and the page starts to become a bit of a mess. So let's turn everything back on and go back to the H1 that we're working on. So let's just completely remove this because we don't want that. Now we can either create a new class by typing that in here. Just type in my name. And then as you see, it gets added here. We can then also now add that in here, .michel. And now we have a specific reference where we can create CSS for. So let's say we want to have all of the text color for this in the beautiful color of green, which color, I don't know why I did that wrong. Color, which actually was when I 20 years ago created my first website, the color that I used for my copy. I hope my teacher still forgives me for that. But this looks a lot more beautiful, right? And now we can also take down some of the margins. If you don't know how to do that by code, you can come down either here and make the changes. Okay? So let's take this down and by 120 pixels, for example. That's a little bit too much. Minus 100 pixels. That's a little bit better. And let's add a margin on the left of 15 pixels so that it is on the same starting line. And let's leave it like that. You get the point, right? You can make changes to the HTML and to the CSS. Of course, you'll be required to know some of the CSS if you want to write it like I just did. But you can also just go in there, turn things on, turn things off. You can click on a box like this and change the color to a completely different color. use a toggle picker, find whatever type you want. If I now refresh the page, everything will go back to what it was. If you have a button like this, for example, which changes based on mouse interaction, you can click on it, inspect it, immediately go to that button, and we can say force the hover. So show me this state only. And now you can, of course, make changes to that. So you can either say hover, and then you can filter down to everything that has something to do with hover. I just know that this is the one that we want to change if we want to change the color. So let's say we want to make that like a pure black color, and the foreground will then be white. Now we have made some simple changes to it. When it is in the hover state, I deactivate this forced element, and I now can interact with it in the way that I just quickly designed. So that can be, again, very handy way of making some changes to behavior that is on the page where you don't agree with or where you have a different vision on. Slowly but steadily, we're actually making quite significant changes to this page, right? Very interesting, very handy, something that is very useful. What is also very useful is, let's say you do work with Screaming Frog or another scraper, and sometimes you want to scrape certain elements from a page that keep coming back, that are reiterating. So let's say we want to get this piece of text because it keeps coming back on every single page. What we can do is we can then, of course, go into Screaming Frog, set up the scraper, and then it asks, for example, for its xpath. We can then right-click this, go to copy, and click on copy xpath. When we do that and we actually go into Screaming Frog, we can paste this to show you what it then pastes. It pastes this, and it will take the content from that information, from that piece of this HTML path. That's something that I quite regularly do. Very handy, very handy. What else do we have here? We can change the page. Oh, here on the bottom of this page, we actually have a breadcrumb so that you know where on the page you actually are. Not super useful, but it's there now. And then here on the right, next to computed layout, we have accessibility. It's possible that you have to actually click on the double arrows. See that this didn't become very mobile friendly, so let's just delete that for now, which is something I didn't highlight, but you can click on it and then quite literally click on what you want, and then let's delete it. So I just press the delete button. Of course, you can also delete it here or edit it as an HTML element and remove it. There's quite a lot of things that you can do here. But let's go back to the accessibility tree. So you go here and you select, for example, this item. In here I have a image, which I gave a attribute of ARIA label, and the text therein is waving hand. And the reason for that is their screen reader would name this out instead of missing it then, because there is an image, they actually see, hey, waving hand, my name is Michel Kant, a technical marketer, etc., etc. And the accessibility tree is also specifically for the screen reader to be used. And this is a very specific part of web development where you have to go very deep on to set all of this up right. But just know that you can inspect it if you're working on this. The best way to do a bit of an accessibility check is to use the Lighthouse tab, as it'll run a lot of checks for you. What you can do here is not that much. If you ever need, for example, this yellow thing here and you want to make a screenshot specifically out of that, well, you can of course use screenshot software, but you can also right click this, scroll into view, and then it'll become the middle of the page. So let's say we're up here, down here, I click here, scroll into view, then boom, we're there. What you can also do is capture screenshot. and then it literally makes a screenshot of that element, which can sometimes also be handy if you need to quickly make a share or whatever, then you have that screenshot. And last but not least, there is, and let's just refresh the page for a second. There is a lot of CSS in here that is actually not used, that is being loaded, but not used. And on the background, actually the same goes for JavaScript, something that we didn't get into on this page because it's part of the console tab. But as a marketeer, it is very interesting to know how much of the CSS and the JavaScript that was loaded for this page is a visitor actually using. And for that, you can do the following thing. You can go and press Ctrl-Shift-P to open up this search bar, and then you search for coverage. Press enter, and it opens up this coverage tab. You can also find this by going in here, go to the more tools, and then go to coverage. It does exactly the same thing. What we can now do is reload the page, and now it's recording everything that's coming in, like all of the code that is coming in. There's JavaScript here, there's CSS here, and on this side you see how big the files are. This is where it gets interesting, because for this specific page, and I didn't do any optimization for this, so I'm not surprised by this, we can see that I am loading 380,000 bytes, so what's that? 3.8 megabytes of code that is actually not being used. And then when you click on that, you can actually see with these red highlights all of the code that it's loaded that it's actually not even using. So then you can work with the developers, product owner, or whoever to say, hey, this has a negative impact on the site performance. I'm seeing that we're not using 94.4% of the code of this specific file. Can we do something about that? Can we minimize that to only loading the code that we need for this specific page? How they do that is up to them. You don't need to know that, but this is a really nice way to prove to them that we're loading just way too much. And the same goes for JavaScript. You know, this is an external file, but apparently they are still loading 13% too much of unused code that we're not needing in this case. Sometimes there's reasons for that, especially with JavaScript. Certain situations things get executed, and certain situations it doesn't get executed. So do listen to what their feedback is on that. And the same goes for CSS, but like in here for me, having only using 5.5% of the CSS, that doesn't really make a lot of sense from a performance point of view. And it could really block some of the rendering of the page. It causes extra data that the visitor has to load, etc. So that's kind of a bonus tip on how you can find code that is downloaded but you don't actually need. And I do hope that you've learned something from all of this. If you do have any questions on how to do something, or if you have any other feedback, let me know down in the comments. Make sure to stick around for the next video, which will be about the console tab, where we will be diving into JavaScript, how you can interact with the data layer if you have Google Tag Manager installed on your website, or basically on any website. And leave a like, and make sure to subscribe if you're interested in more of these types of technical updates. See you in the next video.